Welcome back. Let's read some more. It's Thursday today. It was super hot. Last weekend was like 32 degrees in my apartment. But it's Thursday, the 12th today. Last weekend was a heat wave in my Denmark. But now the temperature is normal. So let's continue reading a bit. I need that little cooler. And I need my jacket on. Let's read the main battle tank. The main battle tank. Let's read the main battle tank again. I'll just duplicate. What I need, it's 1 p.m. soon. I just follow my list. So let's start reading a bit more. But I'm a little bit sleepy today. I need to look my cell phone. Yes, I need 30 seconds to get into my bed.
Main battle tank. Battle tank redirects here. For the video game, see battle tank, video game. A main battle tank, MBT, also known as a battle tank or universal tank, is a tank that fills the role of armor-protected direct fire and maneuver in many modern armies. Cold War era development of more powerful engines, better suspension systems and lighter composite armor allowed for the design of a tank that had the firepower of a super heavy tank, the armor protection of a heavy tank, and the mobility of a light tank, in a package with the weight of a medium tank. The first designated MBT was the British Chieftain tank, which during its development in the 1950s was redesigned as an MBT. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the MBT replaced almost all other types of tanks, leaving only some specialist roles to be filled by lighter designs or other types of armored fighting vehicles. Main battle tanks are a key component of modern armies. Modern MBTs seldom operate alone, as they are organized into armored units that include the support of infantry, who may accompany the tanks in infantry fighting vehicles. They are also often supported by surveillance or ground attack aircraft. The average weight of MBTs varies from country to country. The average weight of Western MBTs is usually greater than that of Russian or Chinese MBTs. History, edit. Initial limited role tank classes, edit. Main article, tank classification. This section does not cite any sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. September 2017. Learn how and when to remove this message. During World War I, combining tracks, armor, and guns into a functional vehicle pushed the limits of mechanical technology. This limited the specific battlefield capabilities any one tank design could be expected to fulfill. A design might have good speed, armor, or firepower, but not all three together. Facing the deadlock of trench warfare, the first tank designs focused on crossing wide trenches, requiring very long and large vehicles, such as the British Mark I tank and successors. These became known as heavy tanks. Tanks that focused on other combat roles were smaller, like the French Renault Foot. These were light tanks or tankettes. Many late-war and interwar tank designs diverged from these according to new, and mostly untried, concepts for future tank roles and tactics. Each nation tended to create its own list of tank classes with different intended roles, such as cavalry tanks, breakthrough tanks, fast tanks, and assault tanks. The British maintained cruiser tanks that, in order to achieve high speed and hence maneuverability in the attack, carried less armor, and infantry tanks which, operating at infantryman pace, could carry more armor. Evolution of the general-purpose medium tank, edit. Main article, medium tank. After years of isolated and divergent development, the various interwar tank concepts were finally tested with the start of World War II. In the chaos of Blitzkrieg, tanks designed for a single role often found themselves forced into battlefield situations they were ill-suited for. During the war, limited-role tank designs tended to be replaced by more general-purpose designs, enabled by improving tank technology. Tank classes became mostly based on weight, and the corresponding transport and logistical needs. This led to new definitions of heavy and light tank classes, with medium tanks covering the balance of those between. The German Panzer IV tank, designed before the war as a heavy tank for assaulting fixed positions, was redesigned during the war with armor and gun upgrades to allow it to take on anti-tank roles as well, and was reclassified as a medium tank. The second half of World War II saw an increased reliance on general-purpose medium tanks, which became the bulk of the tank combat forces. Generally, these designs massed about 25-30 t, 25-30 long tons, 28-33 short tons, were armed with cannons around 75 mm, 3.0 in, and powered by engines in the 400-500 HP, 300-370 kilowatt range. Notable examples include the Soviet T-34, the most produced tank to that time, and the US M4 Sherman. Late war tank development placed increased emphasis on armor, armament, and anti-tank capabilities for medium tanks. 1. The German Panther tank, designed to counter the Soviet T-34, had both armament and armor increased over previous medium tanks. Unlike previous Panzer designs, its frontal armor was sloped for increased effectiveness. It also was equipped with the high-velocity long-barreled 75mm kilowatt K42L /70 gun that was able to defeat the armor of all but the heaviest Allied tank at long range. The powerful Maybach HL230-30P engine and robust running gear meant that even though the Panther tipped the scales at 50 t, 49 long tons, 55 short tons, sizable for its day, it was actually quite maneuverable, offering better off-road speed than the Panzer IV. However, its rushed development led to reliability and maintenance issues. The Soviet T-44 incorporated many of the lessons learned with the extensive use of the T-34 model, and some of those modifications were used in the first MBTs, like a modern torsion suspension, instead of the Christie suspension version of the T-34, and a transversely mounted engine that simplified its gearbox. It is also seen as direct predecessor of the T-54. Unlike the T-34, the T-44 had a suspension sturdy enough to be able to mount a 100mm, 3.9 in, cannon. The American M26 Pershing, a medium tank of 40 short tons, 36 t, 36 long tons, to replace the M4 Sherman, innovated in U.S. tanks many features common on post-war MBTs. These features include an automatic transmission mounted in the rear, torsion bar suspension, and had an early form of a power pack, combining an engine and transmission into a compact package. The M26, however, suffered from a relatively weak engine for its weight, effectively the same engine as the 10T, 9.8 long tons, 11 short tons, lighter M4A3 Sherman, and as a result was somewhat underpowered. The design of the M26 had profound influence on American post-war medium and main battle tanks. The M26 formed the basis for the post-war generation of U.S. battle tanks from the M46 through the M47, M48, and M60 series. British Universal Tank, edit. Britain had continued on the path of parallel development of cruiser tanks and infantry tanks. Development of the Rolls-Royce Meteor engine for the Cromwell tank, combined with efficiency savings elsewhere in the design, almost doubled the horsepower for cruiser tanks. This led to speculation of a universal tank, able to take on the roles of both a cruiser and an infantry tank by combining heavy armor and maneuverability. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery is acknowledged as the main advocate of the British Universal Tank concept as early as 1943, according to the writings of Giffard Le Quesnel-Martel, but little progress was made beyond development of the basic Cromwell cruiser tank that eventually led to the Centurion. The Centurion, at the time designated heavy cruiser and later medium gun tank, was designed for mobility and firepower at the expense of armor. But more engine power permitted more armor protection, so the Centurion could also operate as an infantry tank, doing so well that development of a new universal tank was rendered unnecessary. The Centurion, entering service just as World War II finished, was a multi-role tank that subsequently formed the main armored element of the British Army of the Rhine, the armed forces of the British Empire and Commonwealth forces, and subsequently many other nations through exports, whose cost was met largely by the US. The introduction of the 84mm, 3.3 in, 20-pounder gun in 1948 gave the tank a significant advantage over other tanks of the era, paving the way for a new tank classification, the main battle tank, which gradually superseded previous weight and armament classes. Cold War, edit. A surplus of effective World War II-era designs in other forces, notably the US and the Soviet Union, led to slower introductions of similar designs on their part. By the early 1950s, these designs were clearly no longer competitive, especially in a world of shaped charge weapons, and new designs rapidly emerged from most armed forces. The Quebec Conference in 1957 between the US, UK and Canada identified the MBT as the route for development rather than separate medium and heavy tanks. The concept of the medium tank gradually evolved into the MBT in the 1960s, as it was realized that medium tanks could carry guns, such as the American 90mm, 3.5 in, Soviet 100mm, 3.9 in, and especially the British L7 105mm, 4.1 in, that could penetrate any practical level of armor then existing at long range. Also, the heaviest tanks were unable to use most existing bridges. The World War II concept of heavy tanks, armed with the most powerful guns and heaviest armor, became obsolete because the large tanks were too expensive and just as vulnerable to damage by mines, bombs, rockets, and artillery. Likewise, World War II had shown that lightly armed and armored tanks were of limited value in most roles. Even reconnaissance vehicles had shown a trend towards heavier weight and greater firepower during World War II. Speed was not a substitute for armor and firepower. Soviet T-64 undergoing decontamination. An increasing variety of anti-tank weapons and the perceived threat of a nuclear war prioritized the need for additional armor. The additional armor prompted the design of even more powerful guns. The main battle tank thus took on the role the British had once called the universal tank, exemplified by the Centurion, filling almost all battlefield roles. Typical main battle tanks were as well armed as any other vehicle on the battlefield, highly mobile, and well armored. Yet they were cheap enough to be built in large numbers. The first Soviet main battle tank was the T-64. The T-54 /55 and T-62 were considered medium tanks, and the first American nomenclature-designated MBT was the M60 tank. Anti-tank weapons rapidly outpaced armor developments. By the 1960s, anti-tank rounds could penetrate a meter of steel so as to make the application of traditional rolled homogeneous armor unpragmatic. The first solution to this problem was the composite armor of Soviet T-64 tank, which included steel glass reinforced textolite steel sandwich in heavily sloped glacis plates, and steel turret with aluminum inserts, which helped to resist both high explosive anti-tank, heat, and APDS shells of the era. Later came British Cavorm armor. This composite armor used layers of ceramics and other materials to help attenuate the effects of heat munitions. Another threat came by way of the widespread use of helicopters in battle. Before the advent of helicopters, armor was heavily concentrated to the front of the tank. This new threat caused designs to distribute armor on all sides of the tank, also having the effect of protecting the vehicle's occupants from nuclear explosion radiation. By the late 1970s, MBTs were manufactured by China, France, West Germany, Britain, India, Italy, Japan, the Soviet Union, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States. The Soviet Union's war doctrine depended heavily on the main battle tank. Any weapon advancement making the MBT obsolete could have devastated the Soviet Union's fighting capability. The Soviet Union made novel advancements to the weapon systems including mechanical autoloaders and anti-tank guided missiles. Autoloaders were introduced to replace the human loader, permitting the turret to be reduced in size, making the tank smaller and less visible as a target, while missile systems were added to extend the range at which a vehicle could engage a target and thereby enhance the first round hit probability. The United States' experience in the Vietnam War contributed to the idea among Army leadership that the role of the main battle tank could be fulfilled by attack helicopters. During the Vietnam War, helicopters and missiles competed with MBTs for research money. Though the Persian Gulf War reaffirmed the role of main battle tanks, MBTs were outperformed by the attack helicopter. Other strategists considered that the MBT was entirely obsolete in light of the efficacy and speed with which coalition forces neutralized Iraqi armor. Asymmetrical warfare, edit. In asymmetric warfare, threats such as improvised explosive devices and mines have proven effective against MBTs. In response, nations that face asymmetric warfare, such as Israel, are reducing the size of their tank fleet and procuring more advanced models. Conversely, some insurgent groups like Hezbollah themselves operate main battle tanks, such as the T-72. The United States Army used 1,100 M1 Abrams in the course of the Iraq War. They proved to have an unexpectedly high vulnerability to improvised explosive devices. A relatively new type of remotely detonated mine, the explosively formed penetrator, was used with some success against American armored vehicles. However, with upgrades to their rear armor, M1s proved to be valuable in urban combat. At the Second Battle of Fallujah, the United States Marines brought in 2 extra companies of M1s. Britain deployed its Challenger 2 tanks to support its operations in southern Iraq. Advanced armor has reduced crew fatalities but has not improved vehicle survivability. Small unmanned turrets on top of the cupolas called remote-controlled weapon stations armed with machine guns or mortars provide improved defense and enhance crew survivability. Experimental tanks with unmanned turrets locate crew members in the heavily armored hull, improving survivability and reducing the vehicle's profile. Technology is reducing the weight and size of the modern MBT. A British military document from 2001 indicated that the British Army would not procure a replacement for the Challenger 2 because of a lack of conventional warfare threats in the foreseeable future. The obsolescence of the tank has been asserted, but the history of the late 20th and early 21st century suggested that MBTs were still necessary. Design, edit. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe defines a main battle tank as a self-propelled armored fighting vehicle, capable of heavy firepower, primarily of a high muzzle velocity direct fire main gun necessary to engage armored and other targets, with high cross-country mobility, with a high level of self-protection, and which is not designed and equipped primarily to transport combat troops. Overview, edit. 1 periscope, 2 gun mantlet, 3 coaxial gun, 4 bore evacuator, 5 main gun, 6 driver's optics, 7 driver's hatch, 8 glacis plate, 9 continuous track, 10 machine gun ammunition, 11 commander's machine gun, 12 hatch or cupola, 13 gun turret, 14 turret ring, 15 hull, 16 engine air intake, 17 engine compartment, 18 side skirt, 19 drive sprocket, 20 link, 21 road wheel. Countermeasures, edit. The Challenger 2 is equipped with Cavorm armor, an advanced composite armor. Originally, most MBTs relied on steel armor to defend against various threats. As newer threats emerged, however, the defensive systems used by MBTs had to evolve to counter them. One of the first new developments was the use of explosive reactive armor, ERA, developed by Israel in the early 1980s to defend against the shaped charge warheads of modern anti-tank guided missiles and other such high explosive anti-tank, heat, projectiles. This technology was subsequently adopted and expanded upon by the United States and the Soviet Union. MBT armor is concentrated at the front of the tank, where it is layered up to 33 centimeters, 13 in, thick. Missiles are cheap and cost-effective anti-tank weapons. ERA can be quickly added to vehicles to increase their survivability. However, the detonation of ERA blocks creates a hazard to any supporting infantry near the tank. Despite this drawback, it is still employed on many Russian MBTs, the latest generation Contact 5 being capable of defeating both high-explosive anti-tank, heat, and kinetic energy penetrator threats. The Soviets also developed active protection systems, APS, designed to more actively neutralize hostile projectiles before they could even strike the tank, namely the Shtora and Arena systems. The United States has also adopted similar technologies in the form of the Missile Countermeasure Device and as part of the Tank Urban Survival Kit used on M1 Abrams tanks serving in Iraq. The latest Russian MBT, according to many forum members the T-14 Armata, incorporates an AESA radar as part of its Afghanit APS and in conjunction with the rest of its armament, can also intercept aircraft and missiles. MBTs can also be protected from radar detection by incorporating stealth technology. The T-14 Armata has a turret designed to be harder to detect with radars and thermal sights. Advanced camouflage, like the Russian Nakedka, will also reduce the radar and thermal signatures of AMBT. Other defensive developments focused on improving the strength of the armor itself, one of the notable advancements coming from the British with the development of Cavorm armor in the 1970s. It was first employed on the American M1 Abrams and later the British Challenger 1. Cavorm armor uses a lattice of composite and ceramic materials along with metal alloys to defeat incoming threats, and proved highly effective in the conflicts in Iraq in the early 1990s and 2000s, surviving numerous impacts from 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s era rocket-propelled grenades with negligible damage. It is much less efficient against later models of RPGs. For example, the RPG-29 from the 1980s is able to penetrate the frontal hull armor of the Challenger 2. Weaponry, edit. Merkava Mk3D Baz of the Israel Defense Forces firing its main gun. Main battle tanks are equipped with a main gun and at least one machine gun. MBT main guns are generally between 100 mm, 3.9 in, and 125 mm, 4.9 in, caliber, and can fire both anti-armor and, more recently, anti-personnel rounds. The cannon serves a dual role, able to engage other armored targets such as tanks and fortifications, and soft targets such as light vehicles and infantry. It is fixed to the turret, along with the loading and fire mechanism. Modern tanks use a sophisticated fire control system, including rangefinders, computerized fire control, and stabilizers, which are designed to keep the cannon stable and aimed even if the hull is turning or shaking, making it easier for the operators to fire on the move and forward / or against moving targets. Gun missile systems are complicated and have been particularly unsatisfactory to the United States, who abandoned gun missile projects such as the M60A2 and MBT-70, but have been diligently developed by the Soviet Union, who even retrofitted them to T-55 tanks, in an effort to double the effective range of the vehicle's fire. The MBT's role could be compromised because of the increasing distances involved and the increased reliance on indirect fire. The tank gun is still useful in urban combat for precisely delivering powerful fire while minimizing collateral damage. High explosive anti-tank, heat, and some form of high-velocity kinetic energy penetrator, such as armor-piercing Finstabilis discarding Sabot, APFS, Rounds are carried for anti-armor purposes. Anti-personnel rounds such as high explosive or high explosive fragmentation have dual purpose. Less common rounds are beehive anti-personnel rounds, and high explosive squash head, HESH, rounds used for both anti-armor and bunker busting. Usually, an MBT carries 30-50 rounds of ammunition for its main tank gun, usually split between